Sergeant Jake Miller had always known he could count on his K-9 partner, Rex, a fiercely loyal German shepherd. Together, they had faced countless dangerous situations, but nothing could have prepared them for the nightmare that unfolded on a freezing night in downtown Chicago. The night started like any other, a routine drug bust in the heart of the city. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional echo of sirens in the distance. As Jake and Rex moved swiftly through the dark alleyways, the cold wind bit into their faces, but they pressed forward, eyes scanning every shadow. Jake's heart beat steady in his chest, but a feeling of unease lingered in the back of his mind. Something didn't feel right. The radio crackled, pulling Jake's attention back to the mission. Unit 4, do you have eyes on the target? Came the call. Negative, Jake replied, his hand resting on Rex's leash. We're moving in. Rex's sharp ears twitched at the sound, and the dog let out a low growl, sensing something before Jake could. In the blink of an eye, a gunshot rang out, shattering the silence. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Jake stumbled backward as the bullet tore through his chest, his vision blurring and his body screaming in protest. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air, his hand pressed weakly against the wound. Blood began to seep through his uniform, and he could feel his strength draining fast. Rex was immediately at his side, standing over him, fur bristling with instinctive protectiveness. The German shepherd's eyes locked onto Jake's, as if daring anyone to come closer. Jake's grip on his gun was weak, his hands trembling as he fought to stay conscious. His breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. The radio crackled again. Carter, report. Carter. But Jake couldn't respond. The alley was growing colder, quieter. Time seemed to slow down with every passing second. Rex, sensing the urgency, whined, nudging his handler, refusing to leave his side. Jake was fading fast. If help didn't come soon, it would be too late. But Rex wasn't about to give up. He stood firm, looking down at Jake with determination. There was no way Rex was going to let his partner die in that alley. With a glance back at Jake, Rex made a decision that would change everything. He bolted into the darkness, racing through the streets of Chicago, driven by one single purpose: to save Jake's life. Rex's heroic decision. The cold Chicago air bit into Rex's thick fur as he sprinted through the dark streets, his powerful legs pounding against the pavement. The night seemed endless, the city's distant lights barely visible through the haze of fog. His mission was clear. He had to save his handler, Jake Miller, who was lying in that alley, fighting for his life. Every instinct in Rex's trained mind screamed at him to move faster, to reach help before it was too late. The streets were eerily empty, the usual bustle of the city muted by the late hour. He dashed through alleyways, leaping over trash bins, dodging puddles, his ears alert to every sound. He barely noticed the biting cold, as his focus remained unwavering, centered solely on the man he had sworn to protect. Rex's mind was focused on one thing: Jake. The dog's bond with his handler was undeniable, forged over years of working side by side in high-risk situations. Jake had always been there for him, giving commands, offering praise, and, most importantly, trusting him with his life. Now, it was Rex's turn to return that trust and save Jake from the brink of death. The sound of his paws hitting the wet pavement was a constant rhythm as Rex moved through the maze of streets, his sharp nose scanning the air for any sign of help. Then, suddenly, the familiar scent of Officer Ethan Wells, Jake's closest teammate, reached his nostrils. Rex's instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, he changed direction, sprinting toward Ethan. The officer had just stepped out of his patrol car, unaware of what was coming. Rex's eyes locked onto him with laser focus. He charged forward, his paws moving in swift, sure steps, and before Ethan could react, the German shepherd lunged at him, grabbing hold of his sleeve with his powerful jaws and tugging with force. "Whoa! What's going on, Rex?" Ethan exclaimed, stumbling backward as the dog growled low in his throat, eyes blazing with urgency. The officer's training kicked in instantly. He had worked with Jake and Rex for years, and he knew this wasn't a typical reaction. This was a sign that something was terribly wrong. Ethan's heart pounded as he looked at Rex, who was pulling him toward the alley with unyielding determination. "Where's Jake?" Ethan demanded, his voice tight with worry. Rex let out a sharp bark, his tail stiff with urgency. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed his radio. "Officer down! Officer down! Titan just found me. Need paramedics immediately. He's leading me to Jake." The two of them raced through the dark streets, with Rex's powerful legs moving swiftly ahead, and Ethan scrambling to keep up. They turned corners, dodged obstacles, and finally arrived at the alley where Jake lay. The sight was devastating. Jake's pale face, his breathing shallow and ragged, blood pooling beneath him. "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered under his breath. He slid to his knees beside Jake, immediately pressing his hands to the wound in an attempt to slow the bleeding. But Rex, never leaving Jake's side, whined anxiously, his eyes darting between the injured officer and Ethan. Ethan looked up at Rex, his chest tight with emotion. "He's alive, buddy. We're gonna get him help. You did it. You saved him." Rex's chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths. His mission wasn't over yet. His job was to protect Jake, and he would do that until the very end. As the sound of sirens drew closer, Rex stood, ever watchful, ready to face whatever came next. His heroism wasn't just in what he had done. It was in his unwavering loyalty, in the bond he shared with Jake, and in the relentless determination that had saved a life that night. Finding help. Rex's paws continued to pound the pavement as he led Officer Ethan Wells through the dark streets of Chicago, his mind focused solely on one goal: finding help for Jake Miller. The city around them was eerily silent, the cold air biting into their skin, but neither Rex nor Ethan could afford to slow down. Every second that passed brought Jake closer to the edge, and time was running out. As they moved swiftly through the empty streets, Rex's sharp nose picked up the scent of something familiar. Ethan had been working with Jake and Rex for years, and their bond was almost as strong as the one between Jake and Rex. He knew that the dog's instincts were far superior to anything they could have anticipated, and the moment Rex veered left, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "He knows where to go," Ethan thought. "He's going to lead us to Jake." The K9 German shepherd's determination was evident in every move. His ears were alert, his body tense with anticipation. Rex darted down alleyways, his muscles coiled with purpose as he bolted towards a place he knew would bring help. Ethan, trying his best to keep pace, realized that they were approaching an area he recognized, the vicinity of their station. "Rex is taking me to someone who can help," Ethan thought, recognizing the moment his partner's instincts had kicked into overdrive. He wasn't just running for the sake of it. He was running to get help, and he was taking Ethan to the only person who could help them find their way to Jake. As they neared the parking lot, a familiar scent hit Rex's nose. Officer Daniel Briggs, the closest teammate of Jake's, and Rex's former handler. Ethan's pulse quickened. The connection between Rex and his team was incredible. Rex had never made a wrong decision in a high-stress situation like this before. He bolted toward the officer without hesitation, not waiting for confirmation, just acting purely on instinct. Briggs was caught completely off guard. He had just gotten out of his patrol car, radio in hand, unaware of the emergency that was unfolding. Suddenly, Rex appeared out of the shadows, his eyes filled with urgency. The dog lunged at him, grasping the sleeve of his jacket in his strong jaws, tugging sharply. Briggs staggered back, startled by the sudden force, but he quickly recovered, knowing that something was wrong. "Titan? What's going on, buddy?" Briggs said, trying to make sense of the situation. The dog's growl was deep and commanding, a stark contrast to the usual playful bark he had grown used to. It was a clear sign that something was deeply wrong. Without a word, Rex tugged at Briggs's arm, pulling him toward the direction they had just come from. Briggs's training kicked in immediately. He had worked with Jake and Rex long enough to know that this wasn't a casual reaction. Something was happening to his teammate, something dangerous. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to follow Rex, grabbing his radio. "Officer down! Officer down!" Briggs shouted into the radio, his voice urgent. "Titan just found me. Need paramedics right now. We're headed west of Maine and 14th. He's leading me to Jake." The urgency in his voice was clear as he sprinted to catch up with the determined K9. Rex's movements were swift, precise, every step leading them closer to their injured partner. They cut through alleyways, dodging obstacles, until Rex abruptly stopped. Ethan, now in full stride, caught up to Briggs and followed Rex's gaze. The scene was grim. Jake was lying motionless in the alley, blood staining the pavement beneath him. The cold air seemed to intensify as Ethan slid to his knees beside his partner, panic surging through him. Jake was barely conscious, his breath coming in shallow, agonizing gasps. Rex moved beside them, nudging Jake's cheek with his nose, his eyes full of distress as if willing his handler to stay alive. Briggs's heart dropped into his stomach as he pressed his hands against Jake's wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Come on, Jake, stay with me," Briggs muttered, his voice cracking. Rex whined, circling them, never leaving Jake's side, his instincts clear. He wasn't going anywhere. "Hold on, buddy," Briggs said, voice filled with both fear and determination. "Help's on the way." In that moment, Rex's unwavering loyalty had led them to Jake, saving his life before it was too late. Logan's condition. Ethan Wells dropped to his knees beside Jake Miller, his heart racing as he assessed the situation. The alley was quiet, save for the soft growl of Rex, who stood over Jake with intense focus, never taking his eyes off his injured handler. Jake's face was pale, a stark contrast to the blood soaking through his uniform. Ethan's fingers trembled as he pressed against the wound on Jake's side, feeling the warmth of blood seeping through his gloves. The bullet had torn through his body, just below the ribs, and the blood kept coming, staining the cold concrete beneath them. "Come on, Jake," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking with the weight of the moment. "Stay with me, buddy." Jake's breath was shallow, coming in ragged, painful gasps. His eyes fluttered weakly, struggling to stay open. Rex whined, his nose gently nudging Jake's cheek, as if trying to rouse him, to keep him conscious. Ethan could see the fear in the dog's eyes. Rex knew the stakes. He had been through too many situations like this before, but this time, the outcome was uncertain. Rex's tail flicked slightly, his body stiff with anxiety, but he didn't move away. Instead, he circled Jake, sniffing at him, urging him to hold on. He wasn't just Jake's partner. He was his protector. And right now, his instincts were telling him that his handler needed him more than ever. "Jake," Ethan said again, pressing harder against the wound, trying desperately to stem the flow of blood. "I need you to stay with me. Help's on the way. Just hold on, all right? You're going to make it through this. Stay awake." Jake's lips moved faintly, barely audible. Ethan bent closer, trying to catch his words. Did he make it?" Jake rasped, his voice weak and strained. Ethan's chest tightened at the question, but he fought to keep his composure. "Yeah, Jake," he said, swallowing hard. "He made it. Rex led me right to you." Rex let out a soft, comforting whine and licked Jake's face, as if to reassure him that he was still here, still watching over him. Jake's eyes fluttered again, the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his lips, despite the pain. "Good boy," Jake whispered, his voice barely a breath. Ethan's heart ached. The bond between Jake and Rex was undeniable. Rex had always been more than just a K9 partner. He was family, and in that moment, it was clear that Rex was doing everything in his power to save Jake's life. The distant wail of sirens began to fill the air, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan didn't take his eyes off Jake, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. Every moment was critical. If they didn't get Jake to the hospital soon, it might be too late. Rex, sensing the change in atmosphere, stood rigid, his eyes scanning the alley for any sign of danger. The dog's protective instincts were still on high alert, ready to defend his handler with everything he had. Ethan gently placed a hand on Rex's back, offering him the same reassurance he had given Jake. "They're coming, Rex," he said quietly, glancing toward the approaching paramedics. "You did good. Now we just need to get him to the hospital." As the sound of sirens grew closer, Rex whined again, his body tense, but his eyes never left Jake. He had done everything he could, but the fight was far from over. As paramedics rushed to their side, Rex stayed close, keeping watch over Jake, the unspoken promise between them stronger than ever. Jake wasn't going to face this alone. Not now. Not ever. Titan protects Logan. The wail of sirens grew louder, cutting through the cold night air, but Rex remained unfazed, his sharp eyes locked on Jake Miller as the paramedics hurried toward them. His powerful body was tense, muscles coiled as if waiting for the next move, his protective instincts stronger than ever. Ethan Wells stood beside him, his hands pressed firmly against Jake's wound, desperately trying to slow the bleeding, while the K9's watchful eyes never left his partner. Rex's growl was low and deep, an animal sound of warning, his posture rigid. The paramedics arrived in a flurry, their faces set with urgency. One immediately moved to Jake's side, but Rex stepped in front of him, a silent barrier, his body positioned between Jake and the unfamiliar figures. His eyes flared with a protective intensity, and the sound of his low, rumbling growl filled the air. He was ready to fight for his handler. He wasn't about to let anyone close unless they were there to help. "Rex, easy," Ethan said softly, stepping forward, his hand gently resting on the dog's back. "They're here to help him. It's all right, buddy." But Rex wasn't convinced. His loyalty and dedication to Jake were unshakable, and he wasn't sure whether these paramedics were the right people to save him. His handler, the person he trusted more than anyone, was vulnerable, lying on the ground with blood soaking through his uniform. Rex could smell the fear in the air, and it wasn't just from the officers or the paramedics. It was his own. The paramedics, seeing the dog's protective stance, paused for a moment. They had worked with K9 units before, but Rex's behavior was different. This wasn't just a dog standing guard. This was a dog who was prepared to lay down his life for his handler. One of the paramedics, a seasoned professional, raised a hand in understanding. "It's okay," she said softly. "We'll take care of him. We need to move him now." Ethan, sensing the moment of tension, crouched beside Rex. "He's going to be okay, Rex," he said gently, his voice filled with confidence. "You've done everything. Now let them help." Rex's eyes flicked from Ethan to the paramedics, his ears still perked, listening to every movement around him. Slowly, he stepped back, his body still tense but his growl subsiding. He knew it wasn't time to fight. The paramedics moved quickly, placing a pressure bandage over Jake's wound, securing him to a stretcher and preparing him for transport. As they worked, Rex stayed close, never straying more than a few feet away, his eyes never leaving Jake's motionless form. The moment the stretcher was lifted, Rex whined, a sharp, desperate sound that carried the weight of his concern. He stood still, watching as Jake was loaded into the ambulance, his tail low, body taut. Ethan placed a hand on Rex's head, rubbing his fur in an attempt to calm him. "I know, buddy," Ethan said softly, kneeling down beside the dog. "I know you did everything. Now we just need to let them do their job." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared to life, its sirens screaming into the night. Rex let out a long, mournful whine, his head turning to watch it disappear down the street. He had done his part. Now, all he could do was wait. As Ethan stood beside Rex, he knew that the dog's actions had been nothing short of heroic. Rex had saved Jake, not just by leading them to him, but by standing guard, by refusing to let anyone get close unless they were truly there to help. It was a bond that no one could break. Rex wasn't just Jake's partner. He was his protector, and nothing would ever change that. The long night was far from over, But Rex had already proven what he was capable of. No matter what happened next, Jake would never be alone. Rex would make sure of it. At the hospital, the cold tile floors of the hospital corridor were slick with the hum of urgency. The overhead lights flickered as Ethan Wells paced restlessly beside Rex, who refused to leave his side. The German Shepherd had been by Jake Miller's side from the moment the bullet struck, and now, despite the chaos of the emergency room, his loyalty remained unwavering. Rex's large paws clicked softly against the floor as he walked alongside Ethan, his eyes darting between the closed doors of the ICU and the paramedics who had rushed Jake inside. Ethan hadn't left the hospital since the moment they arrived. He had watched as paramedics worked tirelessly to stabilize Jake, the blood loss severe, the damage to his body almost too much to comprehend. Now, in the sterile quiet of the waiting room, all he could do was wait, trying to keep his mind from running wild with worst-case scenarios. The thought of losing Jake made his stomach twist with anxiety. But through it all, Rex remained calm, focused, as if his very presence was a silent promise to Jake that he would never be alone. Ethan glanced at Rex, who was standing at attention by his side, his eyes never leaving the ICU doors. Rex's fur bristled slightly with tension, his body vibrating with the pent-up energy of a dog who had spent the entire night on high alert. The dog had never been one to show signs of stress, but Ethan knew that Rex's mind was just as sharp as his body, and the bond between handler and dog ran deeper than anyone could understand. "Easy, boy," Ethan muttered, kneeling down to run his hand over Rex's back. He's in good hands now. Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't relax. The dog's gaze was locked onto the doors, his focus unyielding. Ethan had seen Rex in countless high-pressure situations, but tonight had been different. Tonight, Rex had gone beyond his normal duty as a K-9 unit. He had saved Jake's life, led them straight to him when every second mattered. Now, Rex was waiting for the moment Jake would wake up, waiting for the moment the man he had sworn to protect would be okay. The minutes stretched on like hours. Ethan's nerves were raw, and every time the door to the ICU swung open, his heart leapt into his throat, only to sink when no one emerged with news. Rex, too, remained on high alert, his body tense with anticipation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doors to the ICU opened, and a doctor in scrubs appeared, pulling down his mask as he approached the waiting pair. "Sergeant Miller's out of surgery," the doctor said, his tone calm but serious. "The bullet did significant damage, but he's stable for now. We've moved him to the ICU for monitoring." Ethan exhaled in relief, his shoulders sagging with the weight of the good news. "Can we see him?" he asked, barely able to hide the urgency in his voice. The doctor hesitated, his eyes flicking to Rex, who was still standing at attention beside Ethan. The doctor's gaze softened. "Only one of you at a time," he said, "but yes, you can see him. Just keep him calm. He's still unconscious, and we need to be cautious of his recovery." Ethan nodded gratefully, looking down at Rex. "Stay with me, buddy," he said softly. Rex's eyes locked onto Ethan's. His body relaxed ever so slightly, as if he knew the waiting was over. As Ethan followed the doctor down the hallway toward the ICU, Rex padded alongside him, his head held high, his gaze fixed forward. When they reached the ICU room, Ethan stepped inside first, carefully maneuvering around the medical equipment that was keeping Jake alive. Jake's body was hooked up to machines, an oxygen mask over his face, and his chest rose and fell with slow, labored breaths. It was a relief to see that Jake was still breathing, but it was hard to ignore the pale, almost lifeless appearance of his face. Ethan stood beside Jake's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his partner's chest, his eyes focused on the subtle but undeniable signs that Jake was still with them. Slowly, carefully, Ethan placed a hand on Jake's arm, offering a small, quiet reassurance that he wasn't alone. And outside, Rex sat silently in the hallway, eyes trained on the door. He would stay, as always, by his handler's side. The road to recovery. Days passed in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. Jake Miller was stable, but his recovery was slow. The bullet had torn through muscle, but somehow, by some miracle, it had missed vital organs. Still, the damage was enough to keep him in bed, hooked up to machines, surrounded by the constant beat of the heart monitor. The pain was a dull throb, a reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. But through it all, Rex remained by his side. The K9 German Shepherd had never left the hospital room, his sharp eyes never straying from Jake's form. He lay on the floor, his head resting against the edge of the bed, always within reach, his loyalty unwavering. Rex's presence was a comfort, a silent promise to Jake that no matter what, he wasn't alone. Ethan Wells checked in every day, offering updates on the situation outside the hospital. The gang responsible for the ambush was being hunted down, but for Jake, that didn't matter right now. What mattered was the slow, painful road to recovery. Each day, Jake's strength returned little by little. The painkillers dulled the worst of it, but it was the steady pressure of Rex's nose nudging his hand, the feeling of his K9 partner's calm presence, that truly began to heal him. Jake was more than just physically injured. The trauma of the night in the alley was something that would take longer to process. But with Rex by his side, and the bond they shared stronger than ever, Jake knew one thing for certain. He was going to make it. He would walk again, stand tall again, and return to the streets, ready to face whatever came next. Rex would be right there with him. Always. Rex's heroism recognized. As the days passed, Jake Miller began to regain his strength. The physical pain of his injuries dulled, but the mental toll of the traumatic events in the alley lingered. Yet, through it all, there was one constant that kept him grounded: Rex. The loyal K9 had been by his side every step of the way, never once leaving his handler alone. The department couldn't ignore Rex's heroism. Word of the German Shepherd's bravery spread like wildfire. It wasn't just that Rex had found Jake when he was bleeding out in the alley. It was the way he had led Ethan Wells directly to him, the way he had protected Jake in those crucial moments. Rex had saved his handler's life, and the entire precinct knew it. One afternoon, as Jake sat up in his hospital bed, the door to his room opened, and Captain Ryan Carter walked in, a somber smile on his face. He was flanked by several officers, their expressions a mix of respect and admiration. In his hands, Captain Carter held a plaque. "This," Captain Carter said, his voice deep with pride, "is for Rex, for saving Officer Miller's life, and showing what true bravery looks like." Jake's heart swelled with pride as Rex perked up at the sound of his name, his ears standing tall. Captain Carter presented the plaque to Rex, who took it with the same solemn, unwavering attention he'd shown every moment in the field. Rex's tail wagged once in acknowledgement, but his focus never shifted from Jake. The officers applauded quietly, their eyes fixed on the K9 who had proven that true heroism knows no boundaries. Jake placed a hand gently on Rex's head, smiling as he spoke. "He's more than a partner. He's my hero." In that moment, Rex's loyalty had been honored, not just by the department, but by the man he had saved. A new beginning. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft orange glow through the window of Jake Miller's modest home. It had been weeks since the shooting, and though the physical scars were slowly healing, there was a different kind of recovery that still lay ahead. Jake had been cleared for light duty, but the road back to normalcy wasn't just about regaining his strength. It was about finding his way back to the life he had once known, and to the bond he shared with Rex. Jake had spent the past few days at home, recovering in the quiet of his own space. The familiar comfort of his home felt different now, warmer, somehow. The memories of the shooting still haunted him, but Rex's constant presence had kept him grounded. No matter how dark the night had felt, Rex had been there to pull him through. As Jake sat in the living room, his hand resting on the top of Rex's head, he found comfort in the quiet moments they shared. Rex, always alert, sat by his side, eyes scanning the room, ever watchful. The bond between them was unbreakable, more than just handler and dog. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. Ethan Wells had called that morning, offering an update on the ongoing investigation. The gang responsible for the ambush had been tracked down, and arrests were being made. But that didn't matter much to Jake. What mattered was that Rex was still by his side, always there when he needed him most. "I'm ready," Jake whispered to Rex, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the dog or himself. He knew the recovery was far from over, but he was ready to move forward. That afternoon, Jake took his first steps outside since the shooting. It wasn't much, just a short walk to the end of the driveway, but it felt like a victory. Rex trotted beside him, his tail wagging gently, his body pressed against Jake's leg, offering silent support. As they stood at the edge of the driveway, looking out at the world beyond, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead would be challenging, but with Rex at his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. This wasn't just a new beginning for Jake. It was a new chapter for both of them, one that would be filled with new challenges, new victories, and above all, the unwavering loyalty of a K9 who had saved his life. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were ready for whatever the future held.